Welcome back. Well, let's get back to the discussion. Ken, I want to turn to you. We've learned a little bit about what the technology is, but I want to take us to a higher plane and say, what role can this technology play in maintaining our global competitiveness or even improving our global competitiveness in the global protein industry?
So you want to step back and take a big picture?
Yeah.
Well, it's been estimated that by the middle of this century, we're going to have to double food production to meet the pace of population growth. And so that means we're going to have to get a lot more efficient. Matter of fact, they've estimated that when we double that food production, 70% of that doubling is going to have to come from efficiency improving technologies, because after all, our land base for food production is shrinking. So it might be interesting just to visit a little about what's happened in the corn business as it relates to genetics. Thanks to trait stacks that are now being integrated into hybrid seeds, we're estimating that by the middle of the century we could push corn yields to an average of nearly 300 bushels per acre, which is good news for cattle producers because we know corn's likely going to be used for energy production. It also means that we're probably going to have sustained periods of high feed costs. And so technologies such as HD50K feed in nicely to enable us as beef producers to remain competitive across the landscape of agriculture. And it helps to give us tools for traits that are difficult, time-consuming, and expensive to measure, such as dry matter intake and that complex of traits that relate to feed efficiency. So if we can select animals and make rapid genetic improvement in efficient conversion of feed, I think it helps position us to be competitive against the other protein sources, as well as serve a higher calling to help feed the world.
Yeah, that's great perspective. Tom, we have a lot of viewers that watch this show, everybody from folks that have 5, 8, 12, 15 cows to folks that run thousands of cows or operate large feed yards, big stocker operators. Is this technology more appropriate for some sizes and types of cattle producers than others?
Well, I think the technology is actually applicable across the industry, and as you look at the total seed stock spectrum, I think commercial producers ought to be on the phone to their seed stock suppliers saying, you're involved, right? But more importantly, I think there's a group that should be very excited, and that's the smaller seed stock producer who has always struggled. You know, how do I get enough calves to create a meaningful contemporary group so that I can measure things beyond weaning weight? How do I get enough numbers so that I can have a meaningful ultrasound test? Well, what this technology does is it gives that smaller producer a chance to leapfrog past all that, because a genomically enhanced EPD, as we've talked, 7 to 20 additional progeny in that, all of a sudden you're on the same playing field with the big boys. And I think this really levels the playing field, and it gives producers of all sizes an opportunity to be more competitive, to provide better information and service to their customers.
Gerald, I guess I put you on the spot. You know, help me wrestle through the economics. There's a lot of options of where a person can spend their money, from, Tom mentioned, ultrasounding and feeds and supplements and clearly genetics. Make the economic case that this kind of testing makes sense for me.
Well, I can just speak to how we're using it at the ranch, and I think what we've decided to do there, we're keeping our heifer replacements on a lower plane of nutrition. We're using the genomics to identify the superior ones. And so we're not supplementing them as hard as we used to, because we used to always be concerned about how much IMF they would have, how well they would ultrasound. And we wanted to feed them hard enough that we could have those cattle that had those genetics actually pop up as being superior in the population. With genomics, we don't feel like we have to do that now. So we're having a big cost savings in terms of input cost with regard to that. I think on the flip side, we're doing calves at weaning or prior to weaning with regard to the genomics, and I think it will help us identify and eliminate the problem ones, the ones that don't look very good with regard to the data. And I think when we eliminate them at a younger age, it's going to save us money as well. They still may be a loser in our operation, but they will not be as big a loser. Consequently, it's going to be a cost savings to us overall.
Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. Kent, I've seen in some of your literature and some of the presentations, you've been using the words versatile and extendable as you describe this HD50K product. Can you explain to me just a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. Kevin, I think it all goes back to the word coverage. with 50,000 markers across the whole breadth of the cattle genetic makeup, we're picking up signal from lots of markers associated with genes that affect different traits. And for example, just since the first of the year, since we entered into the collaboration with Angus Genetics, Inc., we've seen that versatility come forth in several forms. First, thanks to the folks at AGI, we've got genomic enhanced EPDs now for all the production traits. That's all happened since the first of the year. In the weeks ahead, we anticipate genomic enhanced EPDs for calving. We also enabled the parentage component. So we're taking the parentage markers off of the 50K platform and authenticating sire and dam. And that has more effect than just having an actual and accurate pedigree, in that it also helps us have that extra added assurance that animals are free of genetic abnormalities by virtue of having that authenticated pedigree. And it also helps to contribute to the most accurate EPDs possible because we're linking them back to the appropriate parents. And then another aspect that we're excited about is in the months ahead, we have genomic predictions scheduled to cover off on most of the rest of the EPD traits. So I hope that kind of shows how rapidly we can use this very large, comprehensive panel of markers to evolve with the times, to get better and better predictions for existing traits as we go forward, as well as to add predictions for additional traits that sometimes are really hard to measure but yet have a big impact on either profit or productivity.
It really is some exciting progress. DNA testing and genetic evaluation can return dividends to your operation, and collecting DNA samples to get started is as easy addition as any processing routine. Cattleman to Cattleman reporter Brian Baxter has more.
The growing availability and wider use of DNA technology on seed stock, cow-calf, and feedlot operations across the country is giving leading producers an edge in making more informed breeding and herd management decisions faster. So how difficult is it to get started?
Getting started is easy. Pfizer Animal Genetics is happy to provide on a complimentary basis hair sample collectors or FTA blood cards. We can also have producers submit samples in the form of semen samples. Any of those will provide DNA necessary for our tests. What happens is that the producer that wants to get started can call one of our sales representatives, and we're happy to get the sample collectors into their hands as quickly as possible. Once the samples then are taken, we advise the producer to be diligent about filling out the forms and making sure that the animal identification matches nicely with the paperwork and the sample collector. So upon arrival at Pfizer Animal Genetics, the DNA will be extracted, and then the genotypes for the markers, depending on the panel, will be determined. And those genotypes then will go into our computer, and prediction equations will be applied to those genotypes such that we can then equate them to the genomic breeding value or molecular value prediction that are associated with various traits for that particular animal.
I think the important thing is to understand it is a complex process, and probably when we look at pictures of the lab and discuss things about the lab, it may be a bit understated because there's so much automation and technology behind it that it actually looks a little simpler than it is. Fortunately, though, for us, we have an excellent team of individuals that work throughout the process from the DNA extraction all the way to the development of the customer report. And those individuals really put a lot of effort into everything there and really make sure that we're able to deliver quality predictions every time.
While taking DNA samples on the ranch is not difficult, as with any operation, there are a few key factors to keep in mind.
The more that it can be part of our normal animal processing at various times of the year, the better. For example, most producers will do breeding soundness exams on their bull battery in the spring of the year prior to turnout for spring calving cow herds. And that's a great time to get DNA samples on your bull battery for testing. At the same time, when calves go through preconditioning, either before or shortly after weaning, that's a great time to go ahead and get DNA samples. And on the cow side of the equation, either at pregnancy check time or when they come through for their normal animal health regime. Those all represent opportune times to gather DNA. So if you're using FTA blood cards and you're pricking the ear and getting a drop of blood on the card, it's important to use a different needle every time for every animal so that you don't have DNA from one animal get contaminated with DNA on a subsequent animal. It's also important to let those cards become thoroughly dry before packaging them and sending them.
And more detail on sample collection is available from Pfizer Animal Genetics to take a producer step by step through the process.
We have all the directions necessary to get samples collected on your animals. It's easy to fill out the paperwork, and it's then quite easy to receive the reports and the results and get a hold of either one of us in technical services or one of our sales representatives, and we're happy to go over those results for you.
Usually in less than 30 days, a producer can have in hand the DNA data that will allow them to make decisions based on what they know about an animal, not just what they see.
Now, Ken, is the process for Angus breeders who are collecting and submitting samples to AGI any different from what we've just seen?
Kevin, let's just walk through what an Angus breeder would do step by step to test animals. First step would be to contact Angus Genetics Inc., AGI, and request FTA card collectors. Those are blood spot card collectors. Second step would be to get onto the American Angus Association's website into the secured member section. There's a very efficient, easy way then where members can pull up their animal inventory and flag animals that they will be submitting samples on for testing. Then the samples are submitted to AGI, where they double check to make sure that those animals are on file, and then they batch those samples and send them to Pfizer Animal Genetics, where we run the high-density 50K genotypes and produce the genomic predictions. We then send those genomic predictions back to AGI, and they report the results to customers in the form of genomic enhanced EPDs and percent ranks.
Well, tell us more about those reports and the results that we get back as a result of this DNA testing.
Yeah, first I would just offer that on the public version of the American Angus Association website, it shows whether or not animals are tested by virtue of nomenclature that says PF50 at the upper left-hand corner of the query screen if you use the animal EPD lookup, as well as if you click and highlight on animals that are pulled up from the search engines. And so if that designation is there, you know that the EPDs are powered by HD50K. But in addition to that, Kevin, the customer will also get back percent ranks that are associated exclusively with the genomic predictions from 50K, with lower numbers indicating higher or more favorable percent ranks. So an animal that, say, has a 10% rank for a trait like dry matter intake would rank in the most favorable 10% of the population for low dry matter intake. And those percent ranks then, as suggested there, go beyond just the EPD traits, but include dry matter intake, residual feed intake, and tenderness, which are traits that are only reported through genomic means and not EPDs. The dry matter intake does impact the EPDs for residual average daily gain behind the scenes.
Gotcha. Yeah, I love the percentile ranking because I was in high school in the half the class that made the upper half possible. So both halves have a lot of relevance. Gerald, I want to ask you a question. If folks want to get started with this technology, what advice and suggestions would you give them?
Well, what we do at Express Ranches, Kevin, is at weaning time, we go through, and one of those cards that Kent was talking about, we actually take a blood sample from every calf we wean. We archive it at the ranch. As we went through the problem with genetic abnormalities and other things, with parentage verification and other things, we decided that was a good policy, and I'd recommend that to all purebred producers. And then what we do with the cattle that we identify that we want to turn in for genomic enhanced EPDs, we make sure we turn that in at least 2 months prior to when we want to go to catalog or go to press with that information. And so we always have that information on every animal, every purebred that's born at the ranch, and then we submit it at least 2 months prior to when we want to start on the catalog.
Very good. Did you know that you can find Pfizer Animal Health on Facebook and Twitter? Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/PAHUS/livestock, and follow us on Twitter at Pfizer_beef.